Boker Tov. Today's daf is daf Cha, and we got up to Omar Rav Chizda, which is about 7 lines down for the top. Get sheksavo shelo lishma. So the get was written in a general sense for whatever woman that he would decide later on he wants to divorce, and that's considered shelo lishma. Vehevir olav kulmus. Now he writes on top of the names, and in fact, on every single letter of the get, he writes over the ksav tachton lishma. Bana lemachlokes Rabbi Yehuda v'Rabbana. This issue about a get that was written shelo lishma, ve'hever of kulmus lishma, depends upon a machlokes in Hilchas Sefer Torah with regard to what's called Kedushas Shemos, between Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbana. The sign we learned in a brisa. Hareisha hoyet tzarich lichtov es Hashem. He had to write Yud Kei Vav Kei, and he had to have Kavana L'Shem Kedushas Hashem, but Ubiniskaven, by mistake, he had Kavana Lichtov Yehuda. For some reason or another, it's not clear, but he thought he was writing the name Yehuda, which has Yud Kei Vav Kei with a Daled before the last He. And Vita Velo Hitil Bo Daled. Lishitaso, according to his understanding, he mistakenly omitted the Daled, and he's left with the Shem Hashem, which was written Shelo Lishma. It was written for Chulin, for Chol, for the name Yehuda, not for the Shem Yud Kei Vav Kei. According to Rabbi Yehuda, as quoted here in the Brisa, Mavir Olav Kulmus Umakadsha. He can write over the letters of the Shem Hashem with dio, with ink, obviously, and now he has Kavana L'Kedush Hashem. He can now sanctify the Kedush Hashem and be machshir the Sefer Torah. Chacham Omrim Ein Hashem Min Amuvcha. Now, the language of the Chachamim leaves a little bit of room for confusion. What it sounds like is the Chacham are saying that this Sefer Torah is not the best Sefer Torah. It's not Min HaMuvchar, but it still is kosher. And the Chisaron is because it's lacking in Zek Heli Vanveu. It's not Min HaMuvcha. Now, he writes here that Mimashmos Divrei Chacham Ein Hashem Min HaMuvchar Shelo Poslo Mishum She'ein Ze Nechshav Klal L'Ksiva. The Chacham didn't mean to disqualify the Sefer Torah, as if to say there's no ksiva here, but rather ein zeh ksiva reuya l'shem Hashem. However, this is a very difficult understanding because we're focused on Rav Chizda. Rav Chizda wants to passel a get in the case of Kosvo Shelo Lishma Verelav Kumas Lishma, and he says it depends upon the machlokas between Rabbi Yehuda and Chachamim. Obviously, he's saying that the get is possible, leave it the Chachamim, because the Chacham passel the Sefer Torah. So we have here a very unique case of a Sefer that's not roy lezek keli vanveu, it's not roy le hidur mitzvah, and it's possible therefore. So if you have something that's roy le hidur mitzvah, we could say it has some element of hidur mitzvah, at least the basis, that's fine. But if there's no element of Zek Keli Vanveu, then it's possible. And so too, by comparison, if you're saying that Mavrol of Kulmus is not enough to remove that Ksav Tachton, which was Shelo Lishma, which continues to passel the Sefer Torah, then the same thing would apply to the Ksav Tachton of a get, which was written Shelo Lishma. Maybe with regard to a Chefetz Shel Mitzvah, a Chefetz Shel Kedusha, like Sefer Torah, to be in on Zeh Keli Vanveu, maybe when the Torah says Zeh Keli Vanveu, it has a special implication with regard to a Sefer Torah, the Leka, And when he wrote the Shem Shalol Lishma for the sake of Yehuda, and now he's Mavril of Kumas, that's not Hidur. And that's why the Rabbanan will passel the Sefer Torah. But it's a unique halacha in a cheft of Sefer Torah and in the shemus of Sefer Torah. Al-hacha, but here we get, lo, Rachamim would not disqualify a get when he was Mavril of Kumas Lishma, because there's no mitzvah of Hidur with regard to a get. A get is a secular document. Rav Chizda, another statement of Rav Chizda, Yachilna lemifsalinu lekule Gittin di alma. In the way that we write Gittin today, I could potentially disqualify all our Gittin. And the Gemara is now going to analyze why. Amalei Rava. Rava says to Rav Chizda, my timer, what's your reasoning? If you're saying that our minhag is today that a woman has the get written, what does that mean? The Gemara at the end of Baba Basra formulates the Takonis Chachamim that a woman pays the sofer to write the get. Again, the Baal is going to have to command and mandate the sofer to write the get, otherwise there's no lishma. But as far as payment of schar sofer is concerned, the woman will pay the schar sofer. Why did the Rabbana make such a takana? The Gemara says we're afraid that the Baal might shy away from paying schar sofer, and at the end the get will not be given, and in the meantime she's an aguna. So the Gemara now asks the following kasha. Why would you, Rav Chizda, passel such a get? Vidilma knuye aknule Rabbana may have flexed the muscle of hefker bezin hefker, and they were makne the most that she pays the sofer over to the Baal. And this sugya here is a proof to one side of a major chakira, of a major controversy. What is the scope of hefker bezin hefker? Is it just to be mafkir someone, or can bezin actually, are they authorized to transfer ownership? Here, bezin is transferring ownership, the makne, the most that are going to be used to pay for the sofer over to the Baal. And the Baal is there for the one who writes the get. So therefore, Rava says to Rav Chizda, if you're going to passel Gittin today, it's not because the women, the Nashim, the Isha who's Miskareshes is paying the Skar Sofer. That can't be. Aknuye aknule Rabbon. The Ella. So what is your problem with our Gittin today? Mishum dechsiv, it says with regard to get v'nasan, it says v'nasan b'yada, v'hacha lo yoivla midi. What does that mean, v'nasan? We have halacha in Kol HaTorah Kula that whenever the Torah requires nesina, a nesina has to be a nesina chashuva, like achila requires a kizayis, and Ochlin requires a kibetza, whatever it might be. There's a shear of chashivas, a minimum shear of shava pruta to define a nesina. V'hacha, our gittin lo yoev la midi. The Baal is not giving her a get that's worth a shava pruta. And why isn't it worth a shava pruta? I mean, it's a beautiful piece of artwork on the part of the sofer, but it was written lishma, and therefore cannot be used by anyone else. It has no market value whatsoever. So the Gemara says, in the name of Rava, that can't be Rav Chizda's problem, because Dilma Nesinas Geti, the Torah does not require that you give a Nesina Chashuva, but rather a Maisa Nesina, just a technical, mechanical Maisa Nesina. The Baal has to be Moser, the get, to the Isha. But the Torah didn't mean to say, by using the word V'nasan, that you need a Nesina Chashuva with a value. And I'll prove it to you, says Rav Teda, the Sholchu Mitam, the Chachmei Eretz Yisrael sent a message to Chachmei Bavel, Savo al Yisuria no kosher. If let's say you had a leaf from an arla tree, and the leaf was Aser Bana, and he inscribed the get on this leaf, on Yisuria no, the get is kosher. And that's a pella, because An asina chashuva means you have to give something that's worth at least a pruta. And isuria not even worth a pruta. And therefore, we must conclude, as Rava said earlier, that all the Torah is requiring is the sinas get and the technical act of giving the get. Gufa, let's go back to what Rava quoted. Sholchu mitom, they sent from Eretz Yisrael, Ksaval Yisuria no kosher. Omer Avashi Afanana mitnina. I could derive this halacha from our Mishnah, because the Mishnah back on Daf Yutes says al akol kosmin get, and even al ola shel zayis. Ola shel zayis is worthless. It has no market value, and yet the get is kosher. And therefore, we see clearly that the nesina does not require that the get be a shava pruta. And therefore, we can go ahead and be machshir a get like they did from Sholchu Misam on Isuria no Dilma Shiny. The Gemara says, wait a minute, that's not a proof. Shiny Ola Shel Zayis, the Chazilitz Tarufe. An Ola Shel Zayis has the potential to be mamon. It could have a shava pruta. Let's say you gather together a bunch of these olim, and you can make a mattress out of it, or when you gather together a significant amount of these olim, you can feed it to an animal, and therefore it has chashivus. Tanya, Rabbi Omer, Ksav al Yisuri no kosher. Now, the question here is this Rebbe's own chiddush, or was this accepted by the Chachamim in general? And we saw that Sholchu Misam, the Chachmei Eretz Yisrael, sent a message to the Chachmei Bavel that Ksav al Yisuri no kosher. So we see that it's Chachmei Eretz Yisrael. It's not just Rebbe. Rebbe is one Chacham. And therefore, Nafik Levi Udrasha Mishmei Derabi V'lo Kilsua Rabbanan. When Levi went out to publicize this ruling in the name of Rebbe, then they weren't impressed. You're telling me Allah in the name of Rebbe, you're implying that the Rabbim disagreed with Rebbe. And we have a principle of halacha k'divrei Rabbim v'lo k'divrei Yachid. However, now Levi goes back because he knows that it was the consensus of Chachmei Eretz Yisrael that Ksav al Yisrael no kosher and Mishmei the Rabbim. And now he says it in the name of the Chachamim. Talsu, and now they said, oh wow, that's a very important halacha, we're going to accept it. Alma hilchasa kavaseh. Halacha is like Rebbe because the Chachmei Eretz Yisrael, as a consensus, accepted the ruling of Rebbe. Tana Rabbana, we learned today, Brisa, v'kasav v'lo chokak. This is a big sugya. The Torah requires ksivas haget. Chokak means that he took a knife and he's got a piece of wood and he carves out from the wood with that knife the letters of the get. And it says, "V'kasav v'lo chakak." This get is possible. Lememra, should we decide based on this brisa that chakika lav ksivi, that when you carve out letters, that does not qualify as ksiva, and therefore the get is possible. There's no v'kasa. Ureminu, but I'm going to ask you from a contradictory brisa. Eved sheyotza b'ksav shal gabi tavla. Upinkas yotzel lecheres. Avalo b'ksav shal gabi kipa ve'anduchtere. So we're now talking about a shtar shikrur, and we derive the laws of shtar shikrur from the laws of get. And the brisa makes the following distinction: if the shtar shikrur was carved out on a piece of tavla. Tavla means a daf shalates, and the sofer took a sakin and he carved into the tavla, or for example, pinkas, which is a luach mechupa b'shara. So he's got a flat piece of wood, and he covers it over with melted wax, and then he digs into the wax, makes a chakika, and writes the letters of a shtar shichur. It's kosher v'yotzel lecheres. However, in the following cases, the shtar shichur is possible. Case number one is kosav sav al gabi kippah. Kippah is a kind of garment that's worn on the head, and it's basically made of wool. Women used to wear it underneath their scarf. And andruchtere is a tachshit rekumos botsura shoda. It's also kind of an embroidery that was used for purposes, for ornamental purposes. In these cases, the last two cases, where we're dealing with cloth or wool, the osios of the shtar shichur are not kvuos. In other words, there are two, let's say, ends of how do you say in English, chutim, of threads. The two ends of threads that would be sort of tucked into the beged. But it's not what you call a suras osios kvuos. And if it's not kavua, then it's not kosher zaget shichur. However, we see clearly from the reisha of the brisa that if it was chakuka b'tavla b'pinchas, that's called a ksiva kshera, and the shtar shichur is valid. And that's against the brisa that we quoted earlier that disqualified a get in case of osios chakukos. And now we get to one of the most famous statements in Shas. Omar Ula Omar Abelazar lo kasha hadechak tochos v'hadechak yirechos. There are two ways of creating letters with chakika. One way is to get the osios to be boltos. What does that mean? That you press down, let's say, the face of this wood, and by pressing it down, the os, memela, is boletes. That's called chak tochos. However, there is an opposite possibility in which you dig the letters down into the eights. That's called, instead of boltos, it's called shkuos. So we have boltos, which is called chak tochos, and we have shkuos, which is called chak yirechos. In the case of chak tochos, you didn't really create the letters. What you did is you suppressed the ground around the tzuras ha'os, and the os is memela, me'eleha. That's the key word here, me'eleha. It's boltos me'eleha. It's not that you created the os. The osios were there before. You just removed the eights around the osios. That doesn't qualify as ksiva, and the get is possible. So when we talk about hakika psula, that a hakika does not qualify as ksiva, we're talking about chok tochos. But what about chok yirechos? Chok yirechos means that he suppresses the eights, and you could see in the suppression an eight shkua. Shkua, again, that's the key word, is shkua. I got to underline this again and again. I already underlined it, but okay. And that's considered a Masechet ksiva, a chakika kshe. So the Gemara asks the following kasha. V'tochos lo, are you telling me that when you suppress the area around the os so that memela the os is boletus, that doesn't qualify as ksiva reminu? I'm going to ask you a question from the parsha of tzitz. And in the creation of tzitz, the Torah says, in Shmos Perek Lamed Tes, Vayasu es tzitz nezer hakodesh zahav tahar, vayichtevu alav michtav pituchei chosam kodesh Hashem. So the word vayichtevu appears explicitly in the creation of the tzitz. You need ksiva. the Brisa says Lohoya Ksavo, when it says Kodesh Lashem, it was not Shokea Elabolit. It wasn't that you dug into the Zav to create letters, but rather it was Bolet. The letters of Kodesh Lashem actually protruded. And it's like Dinei Zav. If you have a dinar Zav, then the tzuros on the dinar Zav are boltos. And I believe if you take, let's say, an American quarter, for example, you'll feel it, and it's boletas. So we see clearly in this brisa that the words on the tzitz, Kodesh Lashem, were chakukos tochos, chakikas tochos, because it says ela bolet. So bolet means that it stood up. It means that you suppressed the gold around the letters. And yet it qualifies as ksiva, and the Gemara answers, Kidin reizav, velo kidin reizav. Kidin reizav, the bolet, you're right, it's bolet. But velo kidin reizav, it's not exactly like din reizav, dilu hasam, tochos. In the case of din reizav, when they make the tsura on top of the dinar, what they do is they do a chakika, misaviv, and then the image, let's say the image of the face of the queen, or whatever it might be, is boletes. And that's not considered ksiva. So when it says in the Brisa, kidin reizav, meaning boltos, it means a different kind of method. It's a method of boltos, but not through what we call chok tochos. So how did they get it boltos? Hachi yerechos. So there's a long description here in the name of Rashi and Tosa Rosh. I'm just going to give you the gist of it because we would really have to be, great scholars in I don't know what field you'd call it, not carpentry or engineering, but in order to know how they did this. But basically, it works like this. There are two sides to the gold of the tzitz. There's a side that faces outwards, where you saw Kodesh Lashem, and then there's the side that faces the forehead. And what they did was they punched into the zav from the inside, so it was boletes outside. But basically, what they did was a chok yerechos. Why? Because they actually dug out the letters. So on the one hand, it was like Din Reizav, and that was boltos, but it wasn't boltos because they suppressed the area around the letters. It was boltos because they carved into the zav, they punched into the zav on the inside, and on the outside it was boletes. Now the Gemara wants to know whether or not matbeos of zav were made in chok tochos or in chok yerechos. Amalei Ravina Ravashi. Ravina says to Ravashi that when they create these dinrei zav and they make the tsura on the zav, the image on the zav is rushma. They do it by a method called rushma, which is a chosam shatsura shkuabo. They have a chosam, it's like, if I could give a mashal, like a cookie cutter. And the chosam has a tzura shkua. And they put it down, this roshem, this chosam, onto the dinar, and they bang it with a hammer in order to get the tzura that they want to get. And Ravina was asking Ravashi, when you bang it with the chosam, michretz charetz, right? It pushes down the zav, misaviv, around the tzura. And the question is, now the tzura memela becomes boletes when he bangs on it. Shall we say, therefore, that the ksava, the osios, in creating, or I shouldn't say the osios because that's going to be the comparison of Ravina, to the case of chok tochos, but now we're saying that the way that they make the din rezav is called chok tochos, and that's called rushma and michritz charetz. Oh, or perhaps kenufei machnif. What they do is they push down the dinar zav into the chosen. And he's got a long description here, which we don't have time for, but the bottom line is that then it becomes chok tochos omolei. So Rav Ashi responds to Ravina, michritz charetz. Now, if it's michritz charetz, what it means is that by using this chosam, the letters are boltos me'aleim, which is chok tochos. And yet we saw in the Brisa with regard to tzitz that the tzitz was made like they made the tzuros on the din reizah. So Ravina goes back and asks Rav Ashi, lo yaksavo shokea elaboled kidin reizah. Now, the way you're describing the methodology by which they manufactured the tzura on the outside of the din reizah is michritz charetz, isa gadayich michritz charetz. Then how do you have a ksiva, which is absolutely critical for the tzitz? And that's what the Gemara is going to prove, that you need ksiva for the tzitz.